The confession. When Willow's carefully constructed lie crumbles before her mother, a dangerous secret shared between two women who love each other too much. The verdict had set her free, but Willow Kane couldn't breathe. The jury's announcement of not guilty should have been the moment when everything changed, when the nightmare of the trial ended and her path to reclaiming her children finally became visible. The acquittal was supposed to be her triumph, the legal vindication that would prove to the world that she hadn't attempted to murder her husband, that she was innocent, that she deserved another chance at motherhood. Yet as Willow walked out of that courtroom into the hallways of Port Charles' legal system, something broke inside her that no jury verdict could fix. The aftermath of freedom. Being declared not guilty didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a cage that had simply changed shape. Willow returned to the life that Drew Kane had promised her, a life where everything would be different, everything would be better. Everything would work out. They would remarry, rebuild, reunite. She would get Wiley and Amelia back. Her children would come home, and the family she had lost due to her own desperate decisions would be restored. But that vision was crumbling by the hour. The problem Willow was discovering wasn't the verdict. It wasn't the jury's decision or the public's perception. It wasn't even the knowing looks from people like Kai Taylor, whose eyes held suspicion and something that looked too much like knowledge. The real problem was what Willow had done in the days immediately following her acquittal, what she had done to Drew Kane, and what she had done to herself in the process. The syringe, the injection, the substance coursing through Drew's body as he collapsed to the living room floor with the same finality that she'd experienced when she pulled the trigger months before. Drew Kane wasn't supposed to survive the shooting. In Willow's carefully laid plans, in her detailed calculations of cause and effect, in her desperate belief that his removal from her life would save her children, Drew was supposed to die that night. Instead, he'd survived. Instead, he'd become her ally. Instead, he'd become her husband. And instead of gratitude, Willow had felt only an expanding sense of doom, the weight of his presence in her life, the reality of what loving him would cost her. Because Willow hadn't shot Drew to save her children from Michael. Not really. Not at the end. She'd shot him because she couldn't stand the thought of him being free to hurt someone else. Because his manipulation had become unbearable. Because the woman she'd become in his presence was a person she couldn't recognize in the mirror anymore. She'd shot him because some part of her, the part that was still capable of rational thought despite the psychological distress Drew, had orchestrated, had realized that he would never let her go. That his love was a cage. That as long as he lived, she would always belong to him. The acquittal changed nothing about that fundamental truth. The deterioration. In the days following the verdict, Willow's carefully maintained facade began to show cracks that became increasingly difficult to hide. She went through the motions of being a grateful woman, a relieved wife, a woman ready to move forward with her husband and toward restoration of her maternal role. She attended hospital shifts at General Hospital where she'd been reinstated to her nursing position. She smiled when Drew smiled. She nodded when he made plans for their future. She performed the role of a woman who had been exonerated and was ready to embrace the second chance she'd been given. But inside she was drowning. The guilt wasn't rational. It didn't respond to logic or justification. Yes, Drew had manipulated her. Yes, he had isolated her from everyone who cared about her. Yes, he had used her vulnerability, her desperate desire to be reunited with her children as leverage to keep her under his control. Yes, everything Willow had come to understand about Drew Kane painted him as a man who deserved far worse than what she'd done to him. None of that mattered. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating, a living thing that had taken residence in Willow's chest and refused to leave. She found herself staring at Drew for longer than necessary, searching his face for some sign of awareness, some indication that he knew what she'd done. But Drew remained locked in his body, trapped in the aftermath of a stroke that had left him conscious but immobilized. Locked-in syndrome, the doctors called it. A nightmare made flesh. A man conscious of everything happening around him, but unable to communicate, unable to move, unable to do anything but exist in a prison of his own body. Willow had done that to him. Even if it was justified. Even if he deserved it. Even if it was the only way to truly save herself from his control. She had put him there. And now she was beginning to wonder if she was capable of anything else. The unraveling, Nina Reeves had always been perceptive. It was one of the things that had made her a good mother to Willow, one of the qualities that had allowed her to navigate the complicated waters of her relationship with her daughter. Despite their troubled history, Nina knew Willow the way only a mother could. She recognized the subtle shifts in her daughter's demeanor, the exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness, the way Willow's hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. And she knew something was wrong. The trial had ended, the verdict had come down, Willow had been acquitted. By all accounts, her daughter should have been relieved, lighter, ready to move forward. Instead, Nina watched as Willow grew increasingly burdened, as if some invisible weight was pressing down on her shoulders with each passing hour. The way Willow looked at Drew when she thought no one was watching wasn't the expression of a woman in love. It was the expression of someone looking at a ticking bomb. Someone standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering how long it would be before she fell. Nina had begun to suspect that something far more serious was happening than simple trial-related stress. She'd started to wonder if her daughter had done something else, something beyond shooting Drew, something that could explain the haunted quality in Willow's eyes. When she finally backed Willow into a corner with the kind of gentle but insistent questioning that only a mother could employ. Willow broke. The confession came in pieces at first, fragmented admissions, half-statements that Willow wasn't sure how to articulate. But the core of it was unmistakable. Willow had injected Drew with a substance the day she was acquitted. In the hours after her legal vindication, while the world was celebrating her freedom, Willow had poisoned her husband. The moment of truth. The words hung between them like a physical thing. Nina's face cycled through shock, disbelief, comprehension, and something more complicated than either of those emotions. She stared at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time, as if the woman standing before her was someone she didn't quite recognize. "It was me," Willow finally whispered, and those 4 words seemed to encompass everything, all the manipulation she'd endured, all the desperation she'd felt, all the choices she'd made, and then remade, and then unmade again, in her quest to regain what Michael had taken from her. The injection. Drew. It was me. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The revelation sat between them like a living, breathing thing, demanding acknowledgement and forcing both of them to confront the reality of what Willow had done. But what happened next was perhaps more shocking than the confession itself. Rather than anger, rather than disappointment, rather than the kind of judgment that Willow might have expected from her mother, Nina made a decision in real time. A decision that would bind her daughter to her not through love alone, but through complicity. A decision that would make her a willing participant in a crime. "We can't tell anyone," Nina said quietly, and with those words she transformed from concerned parent into co-conspirator. The conspiracy of silence. In that moment, Nina Reeves became something more than Willow's mother. She became her protector in a way that went far beyond maternal instinct. She became someone willing to risk her own freedom, her own reputation, her own moral standing to keep her daughter safe. The choice wasn't made after careful deliberation or weighing of consequences. It was instantaneous, driven by the kind of love that doesn't calculate or hesitate, the kind of love that acts first and questions later. Willow's relief at being believed, at being protected, at having someone in her corner who knew the worst about her and chose to stand beside her anyway was almost overwhelming. For weeks she had been carrying this secret alone, the weight of it growing heavier with each passing day. And now suddenly that weight was shared. Now there was someone else who knew someone else who could shoulder some of the burden. Someone else whose knowledge meant Willow wasn't entirely alone in her guilt. But that relief came with a price. Because now Nina was trapped too. Now there were 2 people walking around Port Charles with the knowledge of what Willow had done. 2 people who had to smile and nod and act normal while carrying the weight of a serious crime. 2 people who had to worry constantly that someone would connect the dots, that someone would figure out the truth, that everything would come crashing down around both of them. The dangerous game they're playing. What neither Willow nor Nina fully grasped in that moment of crisis was just how precarious their situation truly was. General Hospital is populated with people who would recognize the significance of a suddenly debilitated Drew Kane. It's a small town where secrets rarely stay buried for long. And there were already people who suspected Willow of involvement in Drew's condition, people like Kai Taylor, whose sharp eyes had already pieced together more of the truth than Willow knew. The hospital itself was a minefield. Every doctor treating Drew, every nurse who came into his room, every family member who visited his bedside was operating under the assumption that his stroke came from natural causes, that his sudden collapse had nothing to do with his wife and everything to do with random chance, with medical bad luck, with the kind of thing that just sometimes happens to people. If anyone discovered the truth, if anyone found evidence of what Willow had injected into Drew's body, if anyone connected the timing of her acquittal to his sudden medical crisis, if anyone found the syringe that Willow had hidden, everything would unravel in catastrophic fashion. The quiet aftermath. In the immediate aftermath of her confession, Willow found herself caught in an emotionally complex state. There was relief, yes, relief at having told someone, relief at being believed, relief at being protected. But there was also a deepening sense of dread and guilt that was different from what she'd felt before. This wasn't the guilt of someone carrying a secret alone. This was the guilt of someone who had pulled another person into that secret, who had made her mother an accessory to attempted murder, who had transformed the relationship into something darker and more complicated than it had been before. Nina, meanwhile, was coming to her own reckoning. In the heat of the moment, driven by maternal instinct and love, she had made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. She had chosen to protect her daughter at the cost of becoming a criminal herself. She had become someone who knew about a serious crime and was actively choosing to conceal it. And that knowledge was beginning to settle in not as a relief but as a burden that would only grow heavier with time. The question looming over Port Charles. In General Hospital's world, where secrets rarely stay buried, where people constantly stumble upon information they weren't supposed to have, where the walls between truth and lies are as thin as hospital curtains, one question was becoming increasingly urgent. How long could Nina and Willow really keep this secret? The answer, if history was any guide, was not very long at all. Somewhere in Port Charles, someone was beginning to ask questions. Someone was noticing inconsistencies. Someone was looking at the timing of Drew's stroke and beginning to wonder if it was really as natural as everyone claimed. And when the truth emerged, and in Port Charles the truth always emerges, it wouldn't just destroy Willow, it would destroy Nina as well. Two women bound together by love and complicity. Two women who had made a choice in a moment of crisis that would define everything that came after. Two women who were now trapped in a conspiracy of silence.